Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Last Token Gaming's interview series. Today we are joined by a very, very special guest, Patrick Hickey Jr. He's a Brooklyn-based gaming journalist, yet gaming journalist is but one way he can be referred to. A Renaissance man if ever there was one, Patrick is a full-time English lecturer and assistant director of the journalism program at Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn. As a writer, he's been published by dozens of esteemed platforms, among them the New York Daily News, the New York Times, Complex, Examiner, and the New York Islanders' official site. His work for those and many other publications has earned him copious praise, and even led him to be featured in ad campaigns by Disney, Nintendo, and EA Sports. For personal projects, he runs his own site, ReviewFix.com, and is the author of the acclaimed The Minds Behind the Games book series. As if that weren't impressive enough, he's also a video game voice actor, lending his pipes to indie titles like Relentless Rex and The Padre. We are thrilled to discuss all of this and more with him today. Patrick, thanks for being here.
I don't even think I have to be on the show now. I think you did such a good job of introducing me. Wow, thank you. Oh. I mean that you are. If Robert De Niro was here, he'd be like, you're good, you're good.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be on.
Awesome. So let's start right from the beginning. Where did your love affair with video games begin? What age, game, multiple games, system, etc.?
I would probably say around 3 or 4. The Nintendo Entertainment System, RBI Baseball, Ice Hockey, Blades of Steel, Dragon Warrior, Contra, Mario Brothers, the good stuff. And then as I got older, I kind of got into the Genesis and then the Super Nintendo. But I would say the console that really changed my life forever was the original Sony PlayStation, because I was old enough at that point to buy my own games and to kind of pick what I wanted. Before, it was kind of like everyone was playing Sonic, so my parents got Sonic for us. Everyone was playing Street Fighter. There was a couple of moments during the Super NES life cycle where I played Earthbound and Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger, and I was kind of like, this stuff is really sexy. This is so different from, the stuff my parents want me to play. And then in the PlayStation, it just continued with Final Fantasy VII and Wild Arms and the enhancements and sports games. I mean, I remember playing NHL Face-Off 98 for the first time and seeing polygonal characters and the animations and seeing the actual names of the players and the numbers on the backs of the jerseys. And it was just wow, now it's starting to happen, So yeah, the PlayStation was kind of the original PlayStation was that light bulb moment, and then from there on, it just continued. And once I started really writing, when I was in college, it was just natural for me. I love sports, so I covered a lot of sports, but I also covered a lot of entertainment, and that's kind of how it all began.
Excellent. So you obviously name dropped quite a few games there, but still, the basic question, but it's fun to ask, what are your favorite games? List as many as you want.
It's funny because I'm surrounded by 3,000 games on 300 consoles and stuff like that. Not 300 consoles, 30 consoles. Wow. So RBI Baseball, the original RBI Baseball is definitely up there. Ice Hockey is definitely up there. NHL Face-Off 2001, NHL 94, Pokemon Red, Fallout 3, NBA Jam, Final Fantasy 7. Let's see, what else? I'm just looking around. Devil May Cry, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Halo 3. I'm not a huge fan of first-person shooters. I've gotten into them tremendously after I just finished the Minds Behind the Shooter games. But Halo 3 still stands up beautifully. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire.
Yes. Oh yeah.
That's more than a first person shooter though. That's a racing game. That's a third person shooter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the original, Dead Rising.
Bully. Oh yes. I've been yeah.
Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance is one of my favorite. That franchise, Champions of Norath, all those games that play like that. The original Diablo, memories right there. So I literally will play. I'll play anything, and I hate attaching labels onto games. I love to find out the stories behind the games. It's funny because after I started the book series, I really stopped reviewing games because I feel like just slapping a label onto a game and saying, "Oh, it's good, it's bad," it just robs you of an experience that you could have. So it's like I love talking to game journalists and or gamers, and I'll post a picture of the game that I'm playing right now, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm getting ready to review it." And I'm just like, I feel like you can get so much more out of a game if you try and find out who developed it, why they developed it, the games that influenced them. That's kind of like what I'm all about. So like I gave you a whole wide variety of games, and it's because I don't feel like I'm defined by any like one game. I look at all these games that I'm surrounded by now, and I think of like they all represent certain moments in my life and certain places that I was at the time. Like I'm looking at Spider-Man 2 right now on the PlayStation 2, and that was like I was like 20. I was like a dumbass with long hair and a tongue ring and a band and stuff like that. But like that game, that was the game I would come home to at like 2 o'clock in the morning and just web sling around. And that mechanic, like that web slinging mechanic where like the webs actually started to stick to real things and you weren't just like floating in the air anymore. And, so that's kind of like what I wanted to share in all of my books, like the experiences behind the games, but not for me because who am I, but the experiences behind the developers that actually made these games, all the things that they had to go through to deliver the experiences that we enjoyed.
That is so beautifully said. As a critic myself, like I do obviously I do reviews at Last Token Gaming. I do lots of reviews in general.
I've done thousands too.
But I appreciate that thought. Like it's because there's enough critique, but it's also like I've been thinking for a long time. We don't get to the stories behind video games enough. It's like we're at a point where it's like we've got tons of documentaries that come out about behind the music. Behind the movies, like here's Absolutely. How these movies were made, but like the process of video games, it's like unspoken for a lot. So I love that you're doing that. And
it's crazy. Like I was in a Facebook chat like 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to one of my good buddies, and he was telling me he was in a Starbucks and he heard people talking about a game that he had developed, and he just jumped in and was like, "Well, if you do this, da 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 da," and they were just kind of like, "Well, who are you?" Like they didn't even care. And like it just sucks to me. And as a college professor, I can go to my students and I could go, "Who wrote Romeo and Juliet?" And they go, "Oh, Shakespeare." And if I ask, "Oh, who sings Thriller?" Like they could either say Michael Jackson, or if they're really cool, they'll say Fall Out Boy, But if I say who created Grand Theft Auto, they say Rockstar. And I say, no, Rockstar published it.
Yes.
Who was the guy that came up with the idea? Like what's the story behind it? And like the fact that I know the story behind it, that it's featured in, my last book, The Minds Behind Adventure Games, and like all the things that team went through, and the fact that the original Grand Theft Auto almost didn't come out, that's a story that more people need to know.
Totally. You know what that kind of reminds me of? That anecdote right there where they say Rockstar, they think of the studio. That kind of reminds me of like the old Hollywood studio system where you knew Casablanca, you knew Gone with the Wind, but you didn't know who directed it. It was a studio product. So there's a similar dynamic in games. Like, your Kojima, your Miyamoto, but like, you wouldn't know, like most of the great games you play, you don't know who came. I couldn't name who came up with Street Fighter or Contra or
And there's
Halo.
So many people though too that they'll go, "Oh, it's just some Japanese guy," right? And it's just like there's so many amazing American, Canadian, European developers out there that get absolutely no credit, because when you think of video games, you think of Japan. And listen, I've interviewed plenty of amazing Japanese developers. I love them, but there are so many amazing American, Canadian, like UK developers out there that get absolutely zero credit for their work. And that's been like one of my big goals to kind of show people all of like the different types of game women. There's some amazing female video game developers out there right now.
Yes.
And in the past, in the late 70s, early 80s, that were out there, that were like the only people working in their offices.
Yep, like like Donna Bailey, made
Donna
Centipede.
Bailey, Barbara McCallick, there's so many amazing people out there that get absolutely like no credit. And Donna Bailey is like the one that a lot of people know. But like I said, Barbara McCallick, like we're talking Ren and Stimpy, Little Mermaid. She was at Blue Sky during the whole Vector Man era. Like she did Who Framed Roger Rabbit on the Amiga. She did Astro Blaster in the arcade. Like she's a freaking pro, and we don't know who she is.
Oh,
Why don't we know these things? You know?
I totally agree. Great name drops there, by the way.
Thank you.
So, you have an extensive background in writing. You know, as we've previously mentioned, often as a sports writer and editor.
Yeah.
When did you start writing, and what inspired you to pursue that as your career?
So what happened was I was 18, and I wanted to be a professional hockey player. I'm 6'4", like 250 pounds now. I was like 225 at that time. And what I was going to do is I was going to take a year off after high school and continue to like try and get in like the best possible shape that I could. And then at 19, I was going to apply to as many SUNY, State University of New York, college hockey programs like Division II, Division III, and try and walk on and try and become a pro hockey player. And what ended up happening was I was on my way. I was working out every day, and I was working at a pharmacy. I was a delivery boy, so I was like on the bike like 6-7 hours a day. I had legs like tree trunks, and I got hit by a car and separated my shoulder, busted some ribs, compressed some vertebrae in my neck, and herniated some discs in my lower back. So now I go from that to like this 18-year-old with a cane, and it sucked. And I had to reinvent myself. So I remember this was like a year after the accident. I was still like, going to therapy 3-4 times a week, and I was on unemployment. And it was just kind of like I wouldn't say a dark time, but it was just like I would just sit home and read comic books and play video games and shit. And I was just like, whatever. I had no like real aim or purpose. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching Batman the Animated Series on DVD. And my dad had come in my bedroom, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm watching TV. He goes like, "No, like, with your life." And I'm like, "I don't know." And he goes, "Well, you better fucking figure it out, because you're not going to stay in my house like not knowing what you're going to do." So I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up, and I went online, and I applied to Kingsborough Community College, and like a month later I was in school. And, fast forward, 16 years from there, and I'm the assistant director of the journalism program there. So the school that I ended up going to, now I'm the assistant director of the journalism program there. So, I had to adapt. I mean, we're kind of in a time now where if you have something that you want to do, you have to do it, because we don't know how much time any of us have.
Yeah.
There are people passing away. And the people don't get how bad New York City is now. Like, I live in Brooklyn. I live in the epicenter of this, and people are getting sick, and people are passing away. And if you have a vision and you have something that you want to create, you just have to go and do it. So, I would say after that moment with my dad, I was just kind of like, I'm gonna jump into this writing thing, and I'm gonna do this. I was always a good writer, but like I said, I'm 6'4". I'm a big guy, so I played baseball. In high school, I was like a jock. I had the lead in the school play. I was Danny Zuko in Grease and stuff like that, and I was in bands. So it was just like I had this whole nerdy, geeky side to me that like I didn't show anybody. And after the accident, I just went full geek, and I love it. I would never. People ask me a lot all the time, like, would you ever go back to like before the accident? And I tell them, absolutely not. Like, I love the life that I have now, and I love like the person that I am. So since 18, so that was like 18 years ago. So since I was 18, 19, I've been doing this. So
awesome. And that's a great story, and I connect with that because I do some of my own sports as a hobby. I do boxing. I jog for exercise. But that thing, like, could you be an athlete, be a sports star, or be a writer? I'd rather be a writer too, because it's like with a sports as an athlete, you have a certain shelf life. It doesn't last.
And then you're gonna have to reinvent yourself anyway.
Exactly, and that's like a difficult thing for athletes when they retire to make that clean transition. Whereas with writing, it's a lifetime endeavor.
I tell my journalism students all the time, I'm like, the best part of this is that as long as this works and as long as these work, you can work for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And being an athlete, like, I felt like that helped me, because like I covered professional hockey for about 6 years, and I covered minor league baseball and professional baseball for like 5 or 6 years. And I used to laugh at some of the other writers, because they would ask the players like, "Oh, well, how did you feel at this moment?" And I would go to them like, "What are you, stupid? Like, this is a trained athlete. Like, when he's up in the batter's box, bottom of the ninth, full count, he's not thinking. He's not thinking about like what he's having for dinner. He's not thinking about anything except for putting the bat on the ball. He's a machine locked in, and the player would be like, yeah, man, like, holy shit, like, what was I feeling? What are you, stupid? Blah, blah, blah. But they never thought, like, the players wouldn't think to say that. They'd just give them some stupid, cliche. Just hoping to, help the team and, give one for the Gipper and, with the hope of our Lord Almighty, blah, blah. And it's like, no. And so the thing is, like, writing this book, I've done tons of interviews with video game developers for NBC, Examiner, for my site, and I know that a lot of developers give cliched answers. Well, we're just trying to deliver the best product, something that our fans will like take in and da da da. But I know that there's more than that. So that's kind of like what I go through. And I'm extremely annoying. And I've been told by many developers that I'm extremely annoying and that I ask a ton of questions. But then when they see the final product, they're always like, Pat, I'm sorry. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, they get it at the end, So yeah, to answer your question, it's just like, yeah, I mean, I love like all the adaptations that I've had to make in my life. I feel like they've made me the person that I am.
Oh, excellent. And perfect lead into, so let's talk a bit about, we've given some details already, but let's talk about your Mind Behind the Game series.
Sure.
How many do you have so far? I know you got signed to a multi-book deal by McFarlane. So yeah, just tell us about that journey.
So what happened was my wife was 5 months pregnant. And I really didn't want to be one of those people that looked at their kid and was like, I could have done amazing things if I didn't have you. And my whole thing is like, I had done awesome things before my wife had gotten pregnant. Like the times at NBC, like I had a fantasy football column. I covered 2.5 seasons of Saturday Night Live. I covered 2 Olympics. I covered a presidential election. Like I did tons of cool stuff at NBC. I amassed like this huge video game collection that I'm super proud of. Like tons of fun, cool stuff, But I'm like, I need to write a book or I need to do something really cool, just so like, because I know things are going to slow down once I have a kid, because when you have a kid, the kid becomes like the most important thing. My daughter is like the best investment in my life, and I try and make her number one, over everything else. So I wanted to try and like kind of take something out of the bucket list or like take a feather off the cap and something that I could like say that I've done, so my daughter could be like, what, my dad's cooler than your dad because he did this, something like that, And I remember talking to the director of the journalism program in my school, and I'm like, we need to create a multimedia journalism course. We need to take this program into like the next, century. We need to update. We need tons of new things. And he was just like, no, don't want to do it. And I'm like, why? And he was just like, there's no need to do it. And I just looked at him, and this was somebody that I shared an office with for like a decade. And I was like, this is somebody that just wants to like kind of like ride the status quo. He just wants to like kind of slide through. He's got his tenure. He's got all this stuff. He just wants to slide through. And I had been full-time for about like a couple of years, and I was working on my tenure, but I was just kind of like, I'm not done yet. I'm not dead. I'm 33. I'm like, I need to step up and do something. So like once he said that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a book. And he was like, yeah, go write a book. Like he just kind of like dismissed it. So I remember this was like Halloween of 2016. So I remember going home into this room right now, sitting in the same exact place. And I'm just like, I need to fucking do something. And I started looking around, and I saw Toe Jam and Earl, and I saw Yar's Revenge, and I saw King's Bounty, and I saw Wonder Boy and Monsterland, and I saw Mutant League Football, and I just pulled them out, and I'm just like, I don't know anything about these games other than the fact that they're fun. Like, that sucks. And I love interviews. Interviews are my favorite thing to do as a journalist. I mean, like I told you, I run a site called Review Fix, so I obviously love to do reviews at one point. Not so much now, like I said, but reviews are awesome. And they have the audience, and people love them. And I have plenty of people on my site that have picked up the slack for me, not writing reviews, but running a site called reviewfix.com. But so I was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to find out who developed these games, these 6 people, and I'm going to email them. And I'm going to tell them I want to tell their story. And if 3 out of the 6 get back to me, then I have enough to start a book. So within a week, all 6 got back to me, and all 6 said yes. So I was like, oh my God, holy crap. So now I have all 6 chapters written by like Thanksgiving. So within a month, I had written like the 6 chapters. And because I was just in love, like this was just a massive, like this was great. You know, I was so proud of like what I was writing for the first time in a really long time. And so now it's Thanksgiving. We had just eaten Thanksgiving dinner. My wife is pregnant. Now she's even more pregnant than she was before. So now she's just sleeping. She's relaxing. And I'm sitting on the couch with the cat and the dog, and I'm just like, all right, I got these 6 chapters. What am I going to do? And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just start shopping for a publisher. So I sent 3 emails to 3 different publishers, and McFarlane was one of them. And 3 days later, McFarlane said yes. And I got my book deal. And I'll never forget going to that same person and showing him the letter and saying, look. And he's just like, well, you know, this doesn't mean that they're going to publish your book, right? And I'm just like, yeah, you're right. Because now in my head, I'm saying, now I got to finish a book. They said that they're going to publish this, but listen, he didn't mean the same thing that I meant. But now that just fueled me in my head, like, all right, now I have to finish this book. So then I started getting more developers and stuff like that. And I ended up with 36 games. Probably spoke to about 50 developers on the record, then like another 20 off the record for like background and color and stuff like that. So then that book came out in April of 2018. So it's in its 3rd printing now, which is great. It sold a lot of digital copies too, which is awesome. But what happened was right after the first book came out, after I submitted the manuscript for the first book in like April of 2017, developers that I had pitched before started getting back to me. And they're like, oh, we'd love to talk to you. And I'm like, I finished the book, you know? And then it's just like another one and another one and another one and another one. And now it's like 8 or 9. And I'm like, I started the first book with 6. I've already got like 9. Fuck it, I'm going to do a sequel. So then I ended up getting like 25 games. And I go to my publisher. I'm like, I'm going to do a sequel. And they're like, yeah, no, you're not. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you have some sports games in here. You have some shooter games in here. And you have some adventure games in here. Instead of doing another massive sequel, because I wanted like 40 games, bigger, better, you know. They're like, no. They're like, why don't you do Minds Behind the adventure games? Why don't you do Minds Behind the sports games? And why don't you do Minds Behind the shooter games? We'll sign you to a 3-book deal right now for those 3. And I was like, so this means like I have 25 games now, you know? So now that means I need like at least 90. So now I have to go out and get like 65 more games. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, which one do you think you could have first and when can you have it? So I'm just looking at the list and I'm like, I had like 12 or 13 adventure games and like 9 sports games and like 4 shooters. I'm like, I'll have adventure first, then sports, then shooters. And they're like, okay. And they gave me dates, and I had like 9 months for one, then 9 months after that, and then 9 months after that. So I had basically like 27 months to write 3 books, like 120,000 words each. Like, holy shit. But I just submitted the manuscript for the Minds Behind the Shooter games. And that's my biggest book that I've done so far. It's like 135,000 words. It's got 39 games in it. So, like, I'm super proud of that. So, like, the first 3 books, like, the first contract, like, big contract that I signed, that's finished. But then what happened was in December, I knew that I was almost done with the Minds Behind the Shooter games. And I'm just like, I don't want this journey to end. And the Minds Behind Adventure games had just come out, and it was doing great. And the book's already in its 2nd printing. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do something different, something unique. And this guy right here, this is like one of my favorite consoles of all time. So this is a Sega Genesis. Okay, and that's the this is the Master System converter, so you could play Master System games and those old like card games, which there's not a lot of. But I love the Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis is awesome. Like, I remember when Sonic the Hedgehog came out, it was like, holy shit, games move that fast. You know, like Sonic doing the loop-de-loop and stuff is just like, oh my god. And then Sonic 2 when you could charge up, and then, oh my god. Yeah. So I'm just like, you know what? And everyone talks about how important Nintendo is and was, and they are, but like Sega left such a beautiful blueprint on the industry that I feel like hasn't been celebrated. So I started reaching out to Sega Genesis developers, and I pitched that book to my publisher, and they said yes. And I've already got 29 chapters of that written since January. So, and I'm working on chapter 30, like as we speak. So that's going to be book 5, The Minds Behind the Sega Genesis games.
Oh, fantastic.
So yeah, it's a long answer. I apologize, but
No,
it's
I appreciate the long answers and all these great stories and details, and that was a good move on the publisher to split it up by genre, so then you can reach wider audiences.
absolutely. When it first happened, I was so pissed, Marshall. I was like, "What the? No, this isn't what I want to do." And my wife was just kind of like, think about it. And I'm like, I don't want to think. I don't think I write. And she goes, she goes, adventure. You're going to get some people. Sports, you're going to get a lot of people. And then she's like, shooters, you're definitely going to get people. And blah, blah, blah. And she's like, they're all going to build off of each other. And she was absolutely right. Like, the first book, I'm still super proud of because it was my first baby. But I think the adventure book is written a lot better. I think the stories are a lot better. Sports is freaking insane. Like, some of the stuff I got from some of these EA guys from the early 90s will just like blow your mind. And then the shooter book, I mean, there's some stories in there like on Red Dead Revolver, and Soldier of Fortune and Medal of Honor that I'm just like, I can't believe these guys like actually told me this. Like, they trusted me enough to tell me this stuff, and it's not on Wikipedia and it's not on Reddit. So like, I cannot wait for the first 4 books to like all be out. Cause I mean, to me, it's like, I don't feel like there's a book series out that's like this. Cause again, there's I think what's his name? John Strapansky. He does he does something similar, but it's more like Japanese developers, and he does great books. He's based in the UK. He's a very nice guy. Once this whole stuff kind of like calms down, we're going to send each other autographed copies of our books and stuff like that, because he doesn't want to ship anything right now. But so like I said, I'm doing that more like for the games that influenced Americans and North Americans and stuff. So I don't feel like there's anyone doing like what I'm doing. So I feel like once book 4 comes out, then it's kind of like that's my first like big body of work. And then I mean the Genesis book is going to be super cool because these developers just talk about like how difficult it was to bring like something like Mortal Kombat 3 to life on the Genesis. It's not supposed to work on the Genesis. These guys were like mad scientists on how they got things to work, and the ways they got them to work. So, and there's so many surprises like in that book. So I'm super proud of like the direction that's going in. So, and hopefully like if the Genesis book does well, then maybe I'll pick another console, or maybe I'll pick a decade. Mine's behind the 80s games, mine's behind the 90s games. Like there's like no end to like how much fun I can have and how many different people I can speak to like bring another part of video game history to life.
There really isn't, and it's the right time to do it because it's like video game industry is like it's growing so much, like it's eclipsed movies and music, and it's just the right time to really get this down on the printed page. Like,
absolutely.
Right now I'm working on a review for Brett Weiss's SNES Omnibus. I think that's how we connected through Brett Weiss.
Yeah, I'm in both of his SNES books, and in his NES book, he actually wrote the foreword to my first book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because what happened was I read some of his stuff from McFarlane, and I interviewed him for his Kiss book, his Kiss Encyclopedia. Yep. And Brett's just such an amazing guy, and I was just like, you know what? He didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And I was just like, Brett, I would be honored if you wrote the forward and if I sent you a couple of chapters and if you told me what you thought. And he was super honest. I love his stuff. He's great at what he does. And when he ended up coming to New York for a little while because his wife was teaching here, and I just took him for like a day out on the town. We went to a couple of retro game stores that I knew. We had pizza, and we walked over the Brooklyn Bridge, and we just bullshitted the whole day. And to have him like play a part in the first book, I mean, and he's a great source too because he knows his shit. So like there's a couple of chapters in the adventure book and the sports book where like I get a quote from him where he kind of like puts a couple of things into perspective. I never want to like bogart anybody's style, so I love like what Brett does, like the Leonard Moulton short like little review, and then he bounces in other people's voices and stuff.
Yeah,
I would never want to bogart that. Like my books are they read a lot different from his, but at the same time too, like he's got a couple of instances in a couple of books where he pops in and just kind of like says a thing to kind of add another voice. So
yeah.
So yeah.
Well said. So you don't just play games and you don't just write about them, you voice them too.
Yeah.
Tell us about your voice acting roles in games so far and how you got into that.
Since you like stories, it was the summer of 2017, and I had just finished the first book, and I was bored. And I was just starting to get like sources from the first book that like I couldn't fit in the first book, like that answered me late. So like the sequel wasn't even like thought of yet. Like I was like, oh, maybe I'll have like some long features on ReviewFix, or maybe I'll try and sell these somewhere or something like that. But like the idea of the sequel hadn't like quite come to fruition yet because I was still waiting for the first book to come out. So I was on Twitter, and hold on one second. It's just adjusting. I had just finished. Now I'm posing for like Michelangelo or something like that. I was just sitting around, like kind of figuring out like what I was going to do next, and I was writing for my site. And one of the things I like to do on ReviewFix is feature independent game developers. I love to interview people that have games that no one knows about yet, and kind of do the same thing with the minds behind the games, but like in a Q&A format. That's kind of like quick and easy for me to do as a journalist, but it gets their game out to as many people as possible, and da-da-da-da-da. So I saw an animated GIF of a game that it was like a Catholic priest walking through like a forest. And the tree in the forest, one of the trees just comes out and like slaps him across the face. And it was like, it looked very Minecrafty, like kind of voxel, but the lighting was really nice. So I was like, yeah, this is a developer that I could talk to. This looks like really cool. So I messaged a developer, and I asked to interview him, and I published the interview. And then he goes to me, would you like to play a beta of the game? And I'm like, sure. So we started talking more, and he tells me like I was the first person to interview him. So I was like, wow, that's cool. So like he really appreciated like the interviews, the questions and stuff. So I'm playing the game, and it's totally like an homage to Alone in the Dark, which is great. But what happens is like when you start the game, you're like in your bedroom and a letter comes under the door. So the first like sentence in the game is like, it's been a week since the disappearance of Cardinal Benedictus. So week, W-E-E-K, right? It was spelled W-E-A-K. So, and speaking to these guys, I knew that like they were from Bulgaria and English wasn't their first language. So I reached out and I was like, listen, your game looks good. It plays fun. But I'm like, there's a lot of text. And if there's a lot of typographical issues, that's going to be a problem, you know? And they're like, well, do you know anybody that could fix it? I said, well, you know, I've been an English and journalism professor at that point for over a decade. Like, if you want me to take a look at it. And they're like, it's a lot of work. We wouldn't be comfortable with you, you know, doing it for free. So we discussed the price, and they sent me like the whole story. And within like 4 or 5 hours, I did it. So like a week later, I got my money, and then they messaged me again, and they're like, oh, we have a whole bunch of other stuff for you. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So they're like, yeah, we're not done with you yet. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So then I would continue to play the game. So I'm doing like some QA and some dialogue editing, story editing and stuff. And I was happy with that. I'm like, this is my first job in the video game industry with an indie company. This game is like a love letter to old school, like survival horror games and point and click games. I'm totally down with this. Then what happened was we were getting ready to go to Kickstarter, and oh man, they worked me mega hard. Like I edited the entire Kickstarter page, all of the text on there, everything. I had to edit all of it. And then what happened was like a week before we were supposed to go to Kickstarter, the voice actor left of the main character. And they're like, we're fucked. They're like, he just said he was going through some personal stuff and he can't help out with the project anymore. So I was like, you know what? I'm like, I could do it. And they're like, really? And I'm like, listen, it's supposed to be a scary survival horror game. And I'm like, but he sounds like Russell Brand. It's like, I'm like a wacky English man walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm like, this doesn't match. This doesn't match the text. And they're like, well, do you think that you could do better? And I'm like, sure. So I go into my man cave in the exact spot that I'm in right now. And I'm just like, okay. You edited all of the text. You know the way that this character is supposed to sound. You just have to find it. So I grew up during the Jerky Boys era, like the early 90s, prank phone calls. There was no caller ID, and I used to make a ton of prank phone calls. Oh my God, I was great at keeping people on the phone because part of it was they just wanted to hear what I said next, and it was great. So my wife hates this voice because I used to do it all the time. We would go to the movies, and I would be like, "The following movie is rated PG-13," and people would like look around and go, "Where the fuck did that come from?" And my wife would be like, "Oh my God, oh my God." So I knew I couldn't do that voice for this game. That would just be too out there. That's too Don LaFontaine. That's like a ripoff off of his voice. And I always didn't want to do that like wacky Englishman, Russell Brand, wow. You couldn't do that either. So I'm like, what if I kind of combine the two? So Blowy came up with this dark English accent. My name is Alexander the Padre, and I am a bringer of death upon evil, and I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I just recorded all of the lines in that voice, and I sent it to them. And I remember my throat was so crispy. Like, I was like spitting up blood after I did it, because I had never gotten that low, because I'm like, in a world, one man. It's like right here.
Yeah.
Like, boy, when I talk like this, it's like down here. It's like so farther down, like the diaphragm and the register. And it hurt. And I sent it to them. And their response was, holy shit, can you do this for like the entire game right now so we could plug it into the game like right now? I'm like, sure. So I did it. We didn't get the money in Kickstarter. But what happened was, so many people were like, that voice is really cool for that character. Like, oh, this game is like, this is cool. This is mad retro and blah, blah, blah. And we got picked up by a whole bunch of indie sites. And we ended up getting a publisher, Feardemic. And they released the game in April of 2019 on Switch, PS4, Xbox One. It was released on Steam the year before. So, that's like a dream come true for me. Like, I can go on the Nintendo eShop and like buy a game that like I was the story editor on and the main character. So, and the PlayStation 4 store and all that stuff. So, it was great. But what ended up happening was I didn't want to be a one-hit wonder. So I started then going on Twitter and Discord and finding games that I thought were cool that had no voice. And then I would message the developer and I'd give them like my pitch and tell them who I am and what I've done and stuff. And then that's how I got to work on Relentless Rex. And the guy that does Relentless Rex is amazing. And we had a nice conversation back and forth. And he was looking for like something like kind of Master Shredder-esque for this dinosaur T-Rex characters. So I didn't want to do like a straight rip-off of Master Shredder. So I kind of gave him like an Austrian accent. So oh my God, I haven't done that voice in such a long time. Because I did the trailer for their Kickstarter, and then like I'm gonna have a role like in the game, but the main character is like the little dinosaur, and I play like the big T-Rex. So like Relentless Rex, I'm a big dinosaur, and I run around and raw, and I chew stuff, and I eat stuff, so I sound like Shredder, but I don't. Rah rah rah. And he ate that up. So we used that, and then I found the Caillou Offensive, which looks like the original Grand Theft Auto, but it's like Rampage. So it's like a top-down like monster, King of the Monsters, Rampage kind of game. And I play the narrator. So this is the Caillou Offensive, and you just died. Loser, winner, And I helped them like kind of edit the dialogue for that. And then so those were like the first 3 games that I came in contact with. But then the best thing that's happened to me so far. So not only do I edit dialogue, not only do I voice act, but I'm also writing the story for a game. So what happened was I'll never forget this. I'm on Facebook, and I get a message from Pete Paquette. And he's like, is this Patrick Hickey Jr., the author of the minds behind the games? And I'm like, is this Pete Paquette, the lead animator on BioShock Infinite? And he's like, yeah, how do you know who I am? And I'm like, how do you know who I am? And he's just like, oh, yeah, dude, like, So he's like, oh, I have a podcast. I wanted to know if you wanted to come on. I pre-ordered your book. So now my first book still isn't out yet. We're waiting. But now I'm getting all these opportunities to do other things. So I ended up going on his show and had a great time. And at the end of the podcast, he's like, well, listen, if you ever want to do more in the video game industry, let me know. And I'm just like, I'm letting you know. So we get off the show and he's like, I'm going to call you back in like 2 weeks and we're going to have a conversation about like what it is that I want from you. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. So my wife is awesome. And she's just like, listen, if nothing happens, nothing happens. You had a great time on this podcast, this and that. I'm like, you're right. 2 weeks later, he calls me and he's like, I have this idea for a game. And he tells me the idea for the game. And I'm like, all right, that sounds cool. And he goes, no. He goes, this is just the idea. He goes, what I want you to do is I want you to create the world around this idea. I want you to write the lore. I want you to like create the characters that inhabit this world and everything. And I'm just like, wait, what? And he's like, I want you to write the story for this idea. And I'm like, wow, okay. So, I mean, the game's changed form a little bit, like, over the past, like, 2 years. But, like, where we are now, we've been in development for about 9 months. And the name of the game is Kroom, Kroom. And it's basically, like, The Legend of Zelda. But if Link had Strider's sword and a gun from, like, Contra. So it's, like, it's Legend of Zelda with a better sword and a gun. So it's kind of like Cave Story, Akari Warriors, Contra, and Zelda all had a baby. And Pete's brother, Jeff, does the music, and he's the programmer. Pete is the animator and co-developer, and I wrote the story, and I do a lot of like QA and bug testing, and I'm trying to learn Unity as we speak. So, but it's just like it's like a 2.5-man dev team. So it's like I went from 3 years ago wanting to do something different with my life to now, by next year at this time, I'll have 5 books out and have written a story for a game and have voice acted and edited a whole bunch of games. So that's kind of how that all happened.
That's amazing. And that's gosh, what a trajectory. And that's a perfect lead into my final question. So, you know, like you're a great story right there. Like you start out writing, you get big with that, and then it opens up all these doors for you. I've also had similar experiences too, where it's just like you know, I do my writing for Last Token Gaming, and that got me a TV production gig with Access Sacramento. So it's like it's great how that happens. So with all these great things happening for you, what advice do you have for aspiring writers out there who seek to make a living doing what they love, especially if it is about video games?
So I love when people say, oh, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That's bullshit. If you do what you love, it means so much more to you than the average person. And what'll happen is like they'll never understand. You know, I remember like when I started working at NBC and my dad joking around, like asked me how much I made at NBC. And I told him and he was shocked. He was like, why do you make that much money? And I'm like, because I went to college for 6 years. I have a master's degree in journalism. Like, this is serious shit. This isn't just like me writing about sports and video games and stuff. Like, this is super serious. Like, millions of people read this stuff. Like, people care about this. So just because you have a love for something doesn't necessarily mean that you're the person to write about it. And I've gotten super lucky because, like, I mean, I paid my dues and I wrote for local newspapers and I was editor-in-chief of 2 college newspapers. And I wrote for small websites. I wrote for big websites. I mean, my first year at NBC, I wrote everything but sports and entertainment. And I remember going to my boss. I was like, listen, I'm really, like, bored here. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to write about video games. I want to write about comic books. I want to write about movies. I want to do fun stuff. And if it wasn't for the fact that, like, I did everything that they asked me to do, and I worked overtime, and I did all the things that, like, they could possibly ever ask for me, I probably wouldn't have gotten the opportunities that I got at NBC, you know? So my advice is, like, if you love something, you have to show how much you love it. You can't just say, oh, I love this. Like, you have to show. And the thing is, you have to admit to yourself that as much as you love something, you know absolutely nothing about it. Yep. When I first started writing these books, I thought I knew a lot about video games, and I found out how little I knew. And now I'm almost done with I'm like more than, halfway done with my 5th book, and I still learn things every single day. Like I found out today, I was talking to one of my buddies, Tony Barnes. He's an amazing developer. He's worked on like Mutant League Football, Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Wars Episode 3, Strider. He's amazing. And he told me a story today that I didn't know it. So when he told it to me, I was kind of like, wow. So the thing is, like, if you open up your mind and you kind of like slap away and throw away like cliche and urban legend and all like the stupid nonsense and all the fat, and you just try and like add sustenance and substance to like to your experience, and you try and make things deeper and ask more questions and think more and feel more, then you're going to produce content that people care about a lot more. You know, that's why one of the first things in my journalism classes that I teach, I tell them all the time, like the words like good, bad, very, really, kinda, almost, maybe, none of them exist. They're all bullshit filler words. So, you know, so it's like my advice is, my biggest advice is, if you're a writer, you need to write every single day. You know, the best thing that the coronavirus did was, and I'm sorry, Starbucks, was it closed down Starbucks. So now all those wannabe writers that sit in Starbucks all day on their computers that think that they're writers, now they actually have to write. You know? So that's the thing. People love to say that they are writers, and they love to like put the scarf on and sit on their laptop, and they want people to see them write, you know? And that's the thing. It's not, I mean, I write on the bus, on the train, at home, when everyone's sleeping. Like when I'm in the bathroom, sometimes like an idea will come up, and I'll be on my phone and be like, "Oh my God, that's the beginning of the next chapter. That's right there." Blah blah blah. You know, you're constantly creating content. You know, and one of the biggest things that I can say is sometimes like what you want to write about isn't what people need you to write about.
Yeah.
You know. So I got super lucky that people actually care about like what I have to say in terms of video games. But I mean, if people cared more about my thoughts on like religion in the South, and that would give me an audience, that's what I would write about. Like the whole thing is, you don't write for yourself. Great writers are selfless. They write for the masses. They write to be read. So, I mean, the only reason why I continue doing these books is because people care about them. You know, if no one cared about the first book, then maybe I would have been like, you know what? Okay, let's move on. Let's move into another direction. So the biggest thing is like, find an audience, take care of your audience, and give them what they want. One of the best things that happened with these books is I started a Facebook page, and starting with the second book, I would tell people like, I'm looking to add like 4 or 5 more games to the adventure book. Do you guys have any suggestions? And somebody was like, oh, Zill. And another person was like, oh, Croc, Legend of the Gobos on PS1. So I was like, okay. And I went out and I found the developers and I added them into the adventure book. For the Genesis book, somebody was like, oh, Primal Rage. Oh, General Chaos. And I got those, and those are in the Genesis book. So that's the thing. Great writers care just as much about their audience as they do their source. So.
Excellent. Oh, well, and I second everything you said there. Yeah, you got to do it every day. And you're just, your mind is a nonstop creation machine.
Nonstop.
Like you talk about, like, and I like to go out in public to write, you know, sometimes just to like, well,
sure,
you know, except right now, like, I'll go to Starbucks or I'll even go to Buffalo Wild Wings, just kind of do something a little different. But yeah, what you're talking about, like, you can't just situate it to that. It's like, you got to be willing to get up at 1 a.m. and be like, there's an idea, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like, just from like, you know, you friended me on Facebook, you know, last week or 2 weeks ago, and I spied your page and stuff like that. And it's like, you love music and you love boxing, and, you know, and it's like, you can write about those things, and you love video games. So it's just like, you may go into like, maybe like a year phase where you're just doing boxing.
Yeah.
And then you go into another phase where you're just doing sports, like, or you're just doing video games and stuff, or you obviously seem to be doing a good job with Last Token Gaming and stuff. So that's your main thing. So, but that's the way you have to be, like, as a writer, you have to be able to adapt and grow and change. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're talking right now, you know, because, like, you know, you asked me to be on the show, and I checked you out, and I'm like, this is a good guy. He's doing good work, you know. And that's the thing too. Your sources invest in you just as much as you invest in them.
Yes.
You know, so if you show them that you trust them, and you give them the time and the space that they need to share their story with you, they're going to allow you to tell great stories about them. So.
100% agreed. Oh, well, Patrick, thank you so much. This has been an incredible interview. All your stories and all your insights, these are just very eye-opening, very entertaining to listen to, and I'm really excited to share this with our audience. This is
awesome, man.
This has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Awesome, man. Is it okay if I give a cheap little plug
Oh,
Is that
please.
okay?
Oh, no, I insist. I'm going to include links to your stuff in the transcript.
Okay.
So yeah, plug away.
Awesome. So the first plug will be for the Croom game. So it's croomgame.com, and you can watch us on Twitch. Jeff goes on Twitch and Discord all the time, and you can watch him actually develop the game. It's a lot of fun to watch. So croomgame.com. But also with my book, one of the big things that I do is you can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, Books a Million, Indigo, like wherever fine books are sold online, you can pick up the book. But and it's also available digitally. But if you want like a real personal touch, you can order it directly through me at patrickhickeyjr.com/books. And what I do is like every book that gets ordered through me, I ship personally, I autograph, but I put cool stuff in there. So like you're a Dodgers fan, so like what I would do is like if you ordered the book through me, I would go through all of my old baseball cards and I would find like 4 or 5 like 1985, 1986 like Dodgers cards, and I would put like 5 or 6 in them. So it makes for like a cool story. So you connect. So I don't want to be one of those people. I've gone to book signings before where the person just like next, next,
Yeah.
Next. So I want to have a relationship with you. Like I want you to be like, not only did I like those books, but like I like what he's selling, like the brand that he's selling. Like Jeff Gabor, he's an amazing animator. He's worked on like Horton Hears a Who, Spies in Disguise, Rio, Ice Age. Like he's amazing. And he's bought the first 2 books off of me. And I know he's a big Denver Broncos fan. So the last book that he ordered, I put like a bunch of Broncos cards in there. And then he ends up messaging me and sending me a picture of one of the cards. And he was like, how did you know? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, Carl Mecklenburg was like one of my favorite football players when I was a kid. I'm like, dude, I had no idea. I'm like, I just grabbed like as many Broncos cards that I thought and like the best players that I could. I gave him an Elway and stuff like that. I'm like, I didn't want to put any scrubs in there. So he goes, dude, Mecklenburg retired in 94, and I used to make him for Madden 2001 because he was so good and I wanted him in the game. So not only will like Jeff read the book and appreciate it, but he'll connect with me because I put that card in there. And that's what I want. So if you guys are interested in like a super like different experience, then like order the book personally from me. And I make more of a royalty too. So if you really want to support like a young up and coming author, that's probably like the best way to do it. So thank you.
You bet. And thank you. And again, this has been a wonderful interview. I cannot wait to transcribe this. And thank you so much for your time, Patrick, for all the great stories, for the passion, the insight. Man. And you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, man. Take care. And once it gets published and stuff like that, just link me and I'll share the hell out of it. We'll get it some views.
You bet.
Thank you, man. Take care.
You bet. Take care. Bye.